This video is going to take a look at American imperialism, introducing some of the concepts and ideas, and look at Hawaii as sort of a case study to explore some of the different issues surrounding America's expansion into this imperialist competition with European nations. After the Civil War, the United States is going to go through a massive period of industrialization and essentially catch up with the European nations who began the process of industrialization and urbanization in the early 1800s. By the end of the century, the United States will emerge as one of the leading economic powers in the world. England, who had previously led the world in manufacture and production of iron, steel, and coal, will now simply be outproduced by the United States, who dominates the manufacturing industry and becomes the world's #1 producer of these three essential materials during the Industrial Revolution's second phase. But what the United States does not have is a strong military presence around the world. The United States Army is extremely small, whereas England's is 5 times larger. England has been more active around the world and has had to maintain a strong military presence. The United States Navy is even smaller than England's, 10 times smaller than England's. England has needed a navy to go out and maintain its colonies in places like Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. So militarily, the United States is nowhere near the strength and the size of many European nations. America is also aware of the grab for colonies and the scramble for lands around the world that Europeans have been engaged in the last 60 years or so. There's not much land left as European powers have carved up most of the rest of the world. Competition is an important driving factor in imperialism, and the United States believes that it needs to do something in order to get into this game. But American imperialism is going to be slightly different. American imperialism is more rooted in the idea of manifest destiny, which is the belief that the United States was destined by God to expand west and to control the continent, bringing democracy and capitalism to all people. This is a very romantic view of American history and how it's expanded since its early beginnings. America's always been an expansionist nation. Looking at the United States in 1800, it more than doubled the size of the country with the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and America continued to expand across the continent, something that was not necessarily a foregone conclusion when America began. Lands ceded by Great Britain in 1818, as well as Spain and Florida in 1819, expanded the country's southern and northern borders. The annexation of Texas, the Oregon Country, and the Mexican Cession, and the Gadsden Purchase eventually get America from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast, and the idea of manifest destiny is rooted in American history. But some people wanted to go beyond that, believing that manifest destiny meant that the United States should continue its march not just west, but also south and north, and potentially east, across the Pacific and into Southeast Asia. So for some people, manifest destiny stopping at the Pacific was not the end of the story. The term manifest destiny comes from author and writer John L. O'Sullivan, a journalist who published the following: "It is now time for the opposition to the annexation of Texas to cease our manifest destiny, to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. And that claim is by the right of our manifest destiny, to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federated self-government entrusted to us." John L. O'Sullivan coins the term manifest destiny and writes about it passionately. He said, "We are the nation of human progress, and who will, what can, set limits to our onward march? Providence is with us, and no earthly power can." So according to Sullivan and many others, manifest destiny was a God-given thing, that God had supported the American experiment as it spread west across the continent, and no earthly power can stop us. We should move forward and into more places. Well, one of the places that we're going to focus on in our lessons is Hawaii. Now, the United States had been in contact with Hawaii for a very long time. In 1820, a group of missionaries from New England had traveled to the islands to convert natives to Christianity. Remember, converting people to Christianity is an important driving factor in imperialism. But more importantly than that, they discovered sugarcane, a major cash crop that could be exported back to the United States for sale. So it's not necessarily the humanitarian efforts that gets many Americans to travel to Hawaii, but business opportunities, a common theme that we're going to see in American imperialism. But Hawaii would be a very valuable location for the United States if it were to acquire it somehow. Access to Hawaii would make it easier to trade in Southeast Asia and in China, as American manufactured goods could be exported for sale and more easily transported to other parts of the world, the emerging markets in Southeast Asia. Hawaii could act as a refueling station and resupply station for American ships traveling to Asia, stopping in Hawaii, reloading with coal, moving on to Southeast Asia, and then returning would make it much easier, allowing the United States to dominate trade and transportation in the Pacific. Hawaii could also serve as a strategic location for a naval base to help protect the United States from invasion or to launch attacks against other nations. And there were other nations who were interested in Hawaii, and part of imperialism was competition with neighboring forces. Nations like Japan and England were already attempting to move in on Hawaii, and taking control of Hawaii would prevent those powers from taking over. Let's take a look at what's happening on the islands themselves. By 1890, American businesses controlled 75% of all farmable land in Hawaii. Native and immigrant workers are going to be paid low wages and face terrible conditions and hours, something that we saw in the Industrial Revolution. And as we also understand that racist ideologies are very powerful forces during this time of imperialism and expansionism, it makes sense that Native Hawaiians, who are considered not white, non-Christian people, and non-English speaking people, would be paid less. And the Native Hawaiians are going to suffer greatly as more and more people come to the islands. As Americans and other immigrants from Japan and from other parts of Southeast Asia come to the Hawaiian Islands, they bring with them diseases which Hawaiians had not been exposed to. Those diseases are going to have a huge impact on the Hawaiian population as it drops significantly during the 1800s. Now, for American business owners who have control of Hawaii, they have a big problem. Since Hawaii was a foreign nation, they're going to have to pay high tariffs on imported goods. So as goods were sent and sold from Hawaii to the United States, they were forced to pay high tariffs, which cut into their profit margin. But if Hawaii was to be annexed by the United States and become part of the country, then they would no longer have to pay those tariffs. So they're economically motivated to take some steps and actions into making Hawaii part of the United States. Well, that's going to begin in 1887 with the signing of the BAYONET Constitution, where the King of Hawaii was forced essentially at gunpoint to sign a new constitution that severely limited the powers of the monarchy and increased the powers of American business owners and plantation owners on the islands. Following his death in 1891, Queen Liliuokalani assumes power to a monarchy that's been greatly reduced, and she's not happy about it. She wants to restore the monarchy to power and to remove American business interests from her island. She's seen the impact that they've had on her people and wants Hawaii to return to the Hawaiians. Well, this is a direct threat to these U.S. business interests who have been working so long and so hard to put themselves in this position of power. And with a little help from a few hundred Marines that show up on the islands, in 1893, Queen Liliuokalani is overthrown in a coup led by U.S. business owners and supported by those U.S. Marines. She signs and abdicates over her throne, hoping to protect the Hawaiian people. The Hawaiian League, which is a group of men who own plantations and businesses in Hawaii, are going to establish a new provincial government in Hawaii led by Sanford Dole. That government is immediately recognized by U.S. Minister to Hawaii John L. Stevens and names Hawaii a U.S. protectorate, saying that, quote, "The Hawaiian pear is now fully ripe, and this is the golden hour for the United States to pluck it." As an imperialist, John L. Stevens took very quick and decisive action to recognize this new American-led government in Hawaii. Stevens went on to say, "I'm confident that at no distant day Hawaii will become a part of the United States. It is American in its sympathies and interests. Its best brain and education are American, and best future interests of the United States demand that it shall become an American possession under the flag and laws of the country and people that have taken such a deep interest in the welfare and destiny of the Hawaiian Islands for more than 70 years. Stevens, as an ardent imperialist, puts a pretty positive spin on what's been happening in Hawaii. So the question becomes, will Hawaii be annexed? Annexation is when one country takes over control of another country and adds it to their own. If Hawaii is annexed and becomes a part of the U.S., then those business owners in Hawaii will no longer have to pay import tariffs on sugar. Well, President Grover Cleveland has been a pretty clear anti-imperialist. And President Cleveland has an investigation ordered into what's been happening in Hawaii. And he states in the conclusion that the United States acted inappropriately and that the monarchy under Queen Liliuokalani should be restored. He believes that what happened in Hawaii was un-American and illegal. He said later, "I regarded and still regard the proposed annexation of Hawaii as not only opposed to our national policy, but as a perversion of our national mission. The mission of our nation is to build up and make a great country out of what we have instead of annexing islands." So Cleveland makes his stance clear and orders that the monarchy be restored. This is obviously not what Dole and the other business leaders in Hawaii want to hear, and the provisional government in Hawaii, led by Dole, refuses to follow the president's orders, claiming that Hawaii is now a sovereign nation. The Hawaiian Republic, under their leadership, does not have to abide by any orders of President Cleveland. And they're right. In 1894, a new constitution is written, and Sanford Dole is made president of the Republic of Hawaii without even a vote. Now, Cleveland does not remain president forever, and in 1896, William McKinley will be elected president, and he brings a very positive view of Hawaiian annexation into the White House. One of his first actions as president in 1897 is to sign a new annexation treaty with Hawaii and send it off to the U.S. Senate for approval. Now, not every American believed that annexing Hawaii was a good idea. There was some fierce debate as anti-imperialist leagues wrote articles and pamphlets and gave speeches about why this was wrong. But according to McKinley, we need Hawaii just as much and a good deal more than we did California. It is manifest destiny. So there's that phrase again. What changes the debate in the Senate and in the American public over the annexation of Hawaii is actually the start of the Spanish-American War. During the war, we're going to need to fight the Spanish in the Philippines, and this shows that Hawaii would be a strategic location for our naval forces. And it's the start of the Spanish-American War that will convince many Americans, especially some of those in the Senate, that annexing Hawaii was in the nation's best interest. And on July 6, 1898, the Senate will approve the annexation of Hawaii, and 2 days later, Hawaii is made a territory of the United States. And now it looks like Uncle Sam has entered the game of imperialism with the annexation of Hawaii. You can see him grasping the treaty in his hand while reaching from the United States into the Pacific to the island of Hawaii, while England, Germany, and Japan are in the background. And this image shows the growth of the United States from a little child in 1783 of 13 states to now this growing, large, and more powerful imperialist nation who's expanded across the continent and is now taking over other lands. And you can see European hands held out to the large Uncle Sam by 1899, and now all the nations are anxious to be on friendly terms with Uncle Sam. So some key takeaways from today's lesson. Although the U.S. was the number one economic power, it did not possess a strong military or colonies like other European nations did. Many Americans believed in and supported the idea of manifest destiny and believed that America was chosen by God to spread over and into new places. The island of Hawaii was a strategic location as well as a source of natural resources and cheap labor. that U.S. businesses successfully overthrew the Queen of Hawaii and worked to have the island annexed by the United States, which it will. Not everyone favored annexation, but the start of the Spanish-American War changed opinions. And the U.S. was more interested in expansionism and not imperialism. This is something we'll explore a little bit later in future lessons. So hopefully you now know a little bit more about American imperialism or expansionism and how Hawaii became annexed by the United States.